On the night of July 3, 2025, something shocking and unprecedented almost happened off the coast of Iceland. In the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, the USS Gerald R, one of the most powerful warships ever built, came perilously close to being ambushed by a Russian submarine. The near miss was not just a close call. It was a heart-stopping moment that could have ignited a global conflict in an instant. At 2:17 a.m. on the deck of the USS Thomas Hudner, a destroyer assigned to the Gerald R. Ford strike group, the sonar operator detected something disturbing. It was a faint but deliberate acoustic anomaly, a signal that was too precise to ignore. A Russian Yasen-class nuclear submarine was lurking just below the surface, and it was on a direct path toward the U.S. Navy's Supercarrier. The silence in the control room was deafening. They were under threat, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The moment was a ticking time bomb. The Russian submarine, with its stealth technology and advanced weaponry, was closing in fast, just 38 miles away from the Gerald R. Ford, a distance that could easily bring it into attack range. What initially seemed like a routine naval operation now had the potential to turn into a high-stakes confrontation. The U.S. Navy was faced with a threat it couldn't afford to underestimate. As the seconds ticked by, the gravity of the situation became all too clear. The USS Gerald R. Ford was unaware of the invisible danger lurking just beneath its hull. The submarine, utilizing its stealth and sonar-defeating technology, was able to get dangerously close without detection. In the control room of the USS Thomas Hudner, the pressure was mounting. The crew had just moments to act. Captain Sarah Mitchell of the USS Thomas Hudner, a seasoned officer with years of experience, knew the magnitude of the situation. Her first instinct was to activate Protocol 7, the Navy's emergency response to submarine threats. Within moments, the entire ship went into high alert. The strike group quickly sprang into action, repositioning the destroyers, frigates, and other ships in the fleet to form a defensive perimeter. But despite these quick actions, the Russian submarine remained hidden. Its advanced stealth systems, combined with the natural thermal layers of the ocean, allowed it to slip past the most advanced detection systems the U.S. Navy had at its disposal. It was like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but this needle could strike with deadly precision. For those aboard the USS Thomas Hudner, time seemed to stretch as they anxiously awaited the outcome. The stakes were monumental. If the Russian submarine succeeded in launching a torpedo, the USS Gerald R. Ford, one of the most prized assets of the U.S. Navy, could be destroyed in an instant. The entire balance of naval power could shift, and the world could be thrown into conflict. In a matter of minutes, the threat went from an unknown presence to a clear and present danger. The USS Gerald R. Ford, unaware of the looming menace, continued its operations. But the Russian submarine, most likely the Severodvinsk, was closing in fast. The tension was building. The question now was not whether the attack would happen, but whether the U.S. Navy could prevent it in time. Meanwhile, the crew aboard the USS Thomas Hudner worked tirelessly to pinpoint the exact location of the Russian submarine. Every second counted. If they didn't act fast, the situation could escalate into a deadly standoff. But the Russian submarine's stealth was nearly flawless, and the clock was ticking down rapidly. In a final attempt to prevent disaster, the Navy decided to deploy one of its most advanced assets, the P-8 Poseidon. This maritime patrol aircraft, equipped with sophisticated sonar and magnetic anomaly detection systems, was the Navy's best hope of locating the Russian submarine. Within minutes, the P-8 Poseidon took off from its base in Keflavik, Iceland, and sped toward the strike group. The mission of the P-8 Poseidon was clear: deploy a network of sonar buoys that would create an acoustic barrier around the USS Gerald R. Ford, forcing the Russian submarine to reveal its location. The Poseidon's sonar technology was state-of-the-art, capable of detecting even the most stealthy of submarines. The U.S. Navy's response had now entered a new phase: detection. As the P-8 Poseidon deployed its sonar buoys, the tide began to turn. The Russian submarine, once invisible, was now trapped in a sonic net. Every move it made was being tracked by the U.S. Navy's advanced systems. The once undetected threat was now fully exposed. But the Russian submarine wasn't finished yet. In a desperate attempt to evade detection, it began diving deeper into the ocean, trying to escape the sonar's reach. The deeper it went, the harder it would be to track, but the U.S. Navy wasn't about to back down. Within minutes, the USS Virginia, a nuclear attack submarine, moved in to intercept the Russian submarine. The stage was set for an underwater showdown. The USS Virginia, operating independently 40 nautical miles away, had already locked onto the Russian submarine's location with precision. Its advanced sonar systems honed in on the stealthy intruder, ready to deliver a decisive blow if needed. As the two submarines moved closer, the pressure mounted. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Any mistake, any slip-up, and it could lead to a catastrophic chain of events. The situation was tense, a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Both submarines, fully aware of each other's presence, navigated the depths of the North Atlantic with one goal: to outmaneuver the other. The slightest mistake could give away their position, making them a target for the enemy's deadly arsenal. The U.S. Navy was determined not to let the Russian submarine gain the upper hand. Meanwhile, the USS Thomas Hudner remained on high alert, with its crew monitoring the situation closely. The strike group's other ships, destroyers and frigates, were repositioned to cover every angle, while the P-8 Poseidon sonar buoys continued to monitor the waters. It was a carefully coordinated defense, with every asset working together to track and neutralize the threat. In the darkness of the ocean, the U.S. Navy had managed to turn the tables. The Russian submarine, now fully aware that it was being tracked, had lost its advantage. The U.S. Navy had the upper hand, yet the threat was still far from over. The Russian submarine, sensing its predicament, began to dive deeper, hoping to use the ocean's depths as a shield from detection. This was a standard evasive maneuver, but it came with its own risks. The deeper the submarine dived, the harder it would be to maintain control. It would lose its maneuverability, becoming vulnerable to the U.S. Navy's countermeasures. But the Russian submarine, desperate to escape, had no choice but to push deeper into the abyss. The U.S. Navy responded quickly. The USS Virginia, now within striking distance, moved closer. Its sonar systems finely tuned to detect even the slightest shift in the water. The U.S. Navy had already achieved what was known as a firing solution lock, meaning they had pinpointed the exact location of the Russian submarine. It was a major victory, but the final blow had yet to be delivered. As the Russian submarine dove deeper into the abyss, the U.S. Navy continued to close in. But then, in a move that shocked the crew aboard the USS Virginia, the Russian submarine launched a cyber warfare attack. It was a calculated risk, an attempt to disrupt the U.S. Navy's systems and buy enough time for the submarine to escape or reposition for a lethal strike. In an instant, the U.S. Navy's command systems were thrown into chaos. Communications were scrambled, sonar data was distorted, and sensor information became delayed. It was a bold and dangerous move by the Russian forces. But it also revealed the growing role of cyber warfare in modern military operations. The U.S. Navy, however, was prepared for this. Its advanced electronic warfare capabilities kicked into action, isolating the affected systems and restoring full operational control. The cyber attack was a stark reminder that warfare was no longer confined to the physical realm. The digital battlefield had become just as critical as the oceans. Yet the U.S. Navy's countermeasures were swift and effective, and within seconds the threat was neutralized. The Russian submarine cyber attack had failed, but it had underscored the changing nature of modern warfare. The U.S. Navy wasn't finished. With the Russian submarine now fully aware that it was trapped, the Navy employed one final psychological tactic to force the enemy into submission. Using an underwater telephone system, the USS Virginia broadcast a simple but powerful message. "Unidentified submarine, you are being tracked. Depart the area immediately." The message, transmitted in both English and Russian, left no room for ambiguity. The Russian submarine had nowhere to hide. At this point, the Russian submarine was no longer the predator. It was the prey. The U.S. Navy's tactical superiority, combined with its advanced technology and psychological warfare, had trapped the enemy. The Russian submarine, fully aware that it was being hunted, now had a critical decision to make: attempt an escape or surrender. Either way, the U.S. Navy was in control. The Russian submarine, realizing the magnitude of its situation, began its final attempt at evasion. It dove deeper into the depths of the North Atlantic, hoping to escape detection. But the U.S. Navy wasn't about to let it slip away. The USS Virginia, now closing in for the final kill, maintained its relentless pursuit. The game was almost over. As the Russian submarine dived deeper, the U.S. Navy responded with a course change. The USS Gerald R and the entire strike group altered their trajectory, making it even harder for the Russian submarine to lock onto its target. The calculated course change was part of a broader strategy to keep the Russian submarine guessing, to make it harder for the enemy to predict the Navy's next move. In this deadly game of cat and mouse, the U.S. Navy had played its hand flawlessly. Every move had been coordinated, every asset had been deployed with precision. The Russian submarine, trapped and outmaneuvered, had no choice but to attempt a desperate escape. But it was too late. The U.S. Navy's multi-layered defense had proven too effective. The USS Virginia, now within striking range, was ready to deliver the final blow. The Russian submarine, unable to escape, was cornered. The stakes had been high, but the U.S. Navy had emerged victorious. The USS Gerald R was safe. The Russian submarine, once a deadly threat, had been neutralized. The world had avoided a catastrophic conflict. However, this near miss in the North Atlantic wasn't just another routine naval exercise. It was a wake-up call for the entire international defense community. The encounter highlighted the growing complexity of modern warfare, where threats are no longer confined to traditional battle spaces. The U.S. Navy had proven its superiority in underwater warfare, but the lessons learned from this incident would resonate for years to come. As the U.S. Navy secured its position in the North Atlantic, the implications of this event were just beginning to unfold. The Russian submarine's attempt to ambush the USS Gerald R was a reminder of the growing geopolitical tensions between world powers. The need for technological advancements and military preparedness had never been more urgent. As the digital and physical battlefields continue to converge, the future of global security remains uncertain. As the situation in the North Atlantic de-escalated, the world witnessed a stark reminder of the dangers lurking beneath the waves and in the cyber realm. The U.S. Navy had once again proven its dominance through unparalleled technology, precision, and swift decision-making. The Russian submarine's attempt to disrupt the USS Gerald R was more than a military operation. It was a testament to the shifting nature of warfare, where cyber attacks and stealthy tactics are now as deadly as physical weapons. This close call serves as a wake-up call to global powers, highlighting the need for constant readiness and adaptation to the evolving landscape of defense. The U.S. Navy's success didn't just safeguard one warship, it sent a clear message that America's military prowess will continue to deter threats, even in the most unpredictable environments. The event on July 3, 2025 was more than a tactical victory. It was a critical moment that showcased the complexity of modern warfare. The game has changed, and as the digital, physical, and underwater domains converge, the world can only wait and watch as these high-stakes encounters shape the future of global security.